What's up, gamers? I'm making this video today for anyone who wants to improve their solo queuing experience in Apex Legends. I have somewhere between 2100 and 3000 hours in this game, and I would say I've spent around 90% of it stuck in a cycle of self-hatred fueled by the burning pain of solo queuing. At its core, Apex is a team game, and anyone who's played it knows solo queuing can be one of the worst gaming experiences in any modern title. But I'm hoping to share some of the things I've learned, and maybe I can help some of the other solo queuing warriors out there make their experience a little more bearable, or dare I say, enjoyable. I'm going to be prefacing this video with a couple things, so if you want to skip around, I've added timestamps to each topic in the comments. So, before we get into the girthy meat of this video, I want to say a couple things super quickly. Firstly, I've only played this game on console. Everything I know about PC, I've learned from watching other streamers play, but all of the tips in this guide are relevant to every platform. I would also like to say the skill floor on console is undeniably higher, which can make solo queuing slightly more difficult even for more experienced players on console. Secondly, like I said, this guide is about solo queuing pubs, not ranked. If you'd be interested in seeing a ranked solo queuing guide, let me know. I don't have much experience with it, but I'm willing to put myself through that for the content. And lastly, this guide is for all skill levels and covers everything from basic to advanced topics. I'll preface topics that are particularly aimed for beginners, so you can skip ahead if you already have a grasp of what I'm talking about. Now that all that's out of the way, we can get into the actual video. The first thing I want to talk about is tilting. When you're getting upset, and this causes you to play worse, which makes you more upset, and so on. Apex is a team game at the end of the day, and it's easy to rage when you're playing it alone. Personally, this is the biggest hurdle I've had to overcome, and I believe it's something a lot of other players need to work on in order to improve their solo queuing game. So, the first tip I can give is to switch up your playstyle. If you keep dying off drop to level 150 lifelines with 2k badges who don't even know how to play the fucking game, maybe you need to try landing colder and uncontested. This negates a lot of the RNG and will prevent you from dying off drop. If you keep getting bodied by 3 stacking sweats, maybe you need to play slower and stick closer to your team, as awful as they might be. Maybe nothing's working at all, and you're just getting fucked repeatedly, like my ex-girlfriend at a frat party. When this is the case for me, I enter the fuck it state. A liberating state of mind, where I will send anything and everything without hesitation. I throw any care I had out of the window and get down to business. This can either be detrimental or extremely clutch depending on the day, so try this at your own risk. The second tip I want to speak on is listening to some music while you play if you're able to. Personally, I have Spotify connected from my phone to my Xbox and listen to my daily mixes at a low volume. This has actually helped me a lot more than I thought it would, and I would heavily suggest giving this a try if you're struggling with the tilt. And lastly, I just want to say, check your expectations. No matter how good you are, you're not going to frag out every single game. The best players in the world still die to low-level players all the time in solo queuing. Pubs are all about putting yourself in compromising positions in order to force fights. So go into each game understanding you're at a significant disadvantage, and you most likely will die, just due to the nature of the game. The next topic I want to cover is landing. This may be rudimentary for some, so if you feel like you have a solid grasp of this, I would suggest skipping ahead. First off, you should always try to be jump master. When you and your teammates are picking your legends, you can manually select your legend to increase the odds of you getting jump mastered. If you're not jump master, I would only suggest dropping solo depending on how you're feeling and the level of your tilt. It really just depends on how you're trying to play. If you are jump master, it's extremely important to try to land where you want as early as possible. If you land late, other players will get their loot before you, and the RNG will be skewed dramatically in their favor. To land earlier more consistently, try pinging where you're dropping before you jump, and paying attention to the distance from the dropship. If where you're dropping is directly below the flight path, try to drop it around 400 to 415 meters. Lastly, it's it's important to understand what drops are hot and which are cold. Landing hot means you're going somewhere that's contested by one or more other squads, which leaves a lot more up to RNG and can lead to dying off drop. Where landing cold is landing uncontested, letting you get your loot without fighting for it. Whether you drop hot or cold, it's really up to you, but I think understanding what you're getting into when you land at a particular location is important. Next up, we're going to talk about your teammates. Randoms or randos. Randos are notoriously awful at the game. You can find them dying immediately off drop. You can hear their smoke alarm beeping in the background. You can expect them to blame you every single time they get knocked. There are 2 rules I want to give you when it comes to your random teammates. Never rely on them in any way, and never risk your life to res or revive them. 99% of the time, your teammates will be completely trash. You need to accept that. There's not even any point in complaining about it. It's just the way the world turns. This doesn't mean, however, that you can't use them to your advantage. At the very least, your teammates can be a solid distraction or a time sink for your enemies. Depending on my level of tilt, I may or may not be staying close to my team in fights or while rotating. Oftentimes, if I'm moving far ahead of my team and I run into a squad, I will try to bait them back to my team so all of their aggro isn't focused on me. Another thing to consider is looting. When you're solo queuing, it really is every man for himself, so when you finish a fight, consider who had the best armor, or maybe a loadout that you prefer, and go for their death box first. Show no remorse for taking ammo or meds that your teammates need, because you need them more, and they'll probably just die anyways. I would also suggest trying to lead your team as best as you can. I often find my randos lag behind and move very slowly. Don't be afraid to move ahead of them and use pings to guide them. Shiny objects and loud noises can grab their attention. If there are enemies nearby, you may need to spam ping the floor until they realize what's happening. To wrap up this section, I just want to reiterate, your teammates will almost always be terrible, but are never completely useless. Play off of them as much as you want, but never, ever rely on them. This next segment is some advice on 1v3 or 1v2ing. Like we just discussed, your teammates will almost always be completely awful, and you'll often find yourself outnumbered. So here are some tips on how you can win more of these fights. The most important thing, in my opinion, is to be keeping track of where the enemies are at all times. This isn't always possible, and at times you may need to predict or weigh out the odds of an enemy moving in certain ways. The more you play, the more accurately you can predict how players will act in specific situations or at specific locations. If you're somewhat accurately keeping track of where the enemy team is at, you can focus on isolated enemies and force 1v1 confrontations, while negating the risk of getting shot in the side or the back by their teammates. Another thing to keep in mind is how aggressive the enemy team is. Oftentimes, if the enemy team knows you're alone, they'll push you extremely aggressively. This aggression can be easily taken advantage of, as it makes their approach extremely predictable. For example, here's a clip of me using a triple take to 1v3 this squad. I knew this team was going to push the fuck out of me after they killed and finished my teammates, so I got to the nearest high ground to limit the amount of paths they could take to get to me. After whiffing most of my shots on the lifeline, I finally get her, and expect one or more of her teammates to climb up very soon. I'm looking around and using audio cues to predict where they will come from. Shortly after, I can hear where the Octane is going to climb from and pre-aim that spot. This gives me an extremely easy kill and is a perfect example of how to use an enemy team's blind aggression and confidence against them. After this, I want to attempt to heal before the other teammate pushes me, so I climb on these boxes to get a good view of every angle they could approach me from and start to pop a battery. However, their last teammate climbs up very shortly after, so I have to stop healing and take the 1v1. A quick note, it's important to try to heal when you can. When you're outnumbered, every point of health counts, and even just getting one cell off can make all the difference. Here's another clip. At this point in the game, this team had been chasing me for a minute or so. I ended up deciding to turn on them after I got on top of the train station at Frag East. Also, super quick, I just want to say this is a super old clip, so my mechanics aren't top notch or anything. Anyways, based on where they were chasing me from, I figured they would most likely push me from this side that I'm looking at. After a pretty solid trade with the Wraith, she phases out and leaves. At this point, I figure the enemy team knows I'm at this spot, and I think if I stay here I can easily predict where they will approach me from. I'm focusing either on the stairs or the spot that the Wraith originally climbed up from. After getting bamboozled, I discover at least one of their teammates isn't in the building, and I'm expecting 2 enemies to push me soon. I hear someone getting close to the stairs, so I duck out to the side out of sight to attempt to bait them to walk up. When they do, I peek out and get a solid hit with the PK, then swap to the R9 and finish the job. Once I knock the lifeline, I see Wraith immediately pushing me. I know she's fully healed and I need to back off to pop a bat. While I'm doing so, I jump to peek over the cover and make sure she's still pushing me. Once I knock the Wraith, I know this was a pretty long fight, so her teammate is probably nearby, and I want to try to get this bat off while keeping an eye out for the push. After an absolutely legendary 500 IQ grapple, the only place left for me to go is inside of the train station, where I hold the door and pop a bat. Once he thermites the door, I back off and make sure my guns are reloaded. I think he's going to push me pretty soon, maybe even through the thermite, so I don't heal for now, and instead wait behind this cover, listening for his footsteps. Once I hear him approaching, I open with a PK shot and finish off with the R9. At this point, I had heard someone self-rezzing and know it's either the Wraith or the lifeline, and they've probably gotten up and fully healed by now. I don't have a solid idea of where they are, but I'm thinking they're most likely above me somewhere. Here I'm choking up the PK, just looking around. Honestly, I probably should have popped a medkit or a syringe in this time. Here I happen to see the lifeline before she sees me, and I get a really solid opening shot. And now I really don't know who has self-res or where they're at, but I know the ring is closing and I need to get the fuck out. That's all for this clip, but just to tie a bow on it, I don't know who had self-res, but they all ended up dying to ring. And that's it as far as 1v2 or 1v3 advice. There's a lot to be said about this, and I could go on for a while. You may see me release a video just about this topic in the future. The last thing I want to cover is about picking your legend. At the end of the day, the choice is really up to you and your preference, but I would suggest picking legends that benefit you individually, rather than your team. Another thing to consider is the hitbox of your legend, and the low profile and fortified passives. Fortified is a passive ability for Gibby and Caustic that makes you take 15% less damage. Low profile is a passive ability for Pathfinder, Wraith, Watson, and Lifeline that makes you take 5% additional damage, and shots to your legs do the same amount of damage as shots to your torso. Of course, there are pros and cons to each legend that I could go over, but for time's sake, here are my top 3 picks currently in order. Number 1 for me right now is Wraith. She has a small hitbox, an easy escape, and her portal can be useful for getting out of sketchy situations. Her only downside is that she has low profile. She's pretty much been the strongest independent legend since the beginning of the game, and she's also super fun to play. Number 2 is Pathfinder, mostly because he's been my main for a few seasons and he's still pretty fun to play. Unfortunately though, there aren't a lot of pros to him at the moment, and his biggest downsides are his extremely long grapple cooldown and him having low profile even though he's one of the biggest hitboxes in the game. My number 3 pick is Bloodhound. The Hound has really been buffed into god tier status over the last couple updates. The scan cooldown is extremely short. When you scan an enemy, they remain tagged for a long time, and when you're in his ultimate, you essentially become a walking crypto drone that can see through walls. The biggest downside for solo queuing his Bloodhound is just the fact that his abilities almost always give away your position, which can be detrimental as a solo player. Those are my current top 3 picks, but like I said, this really is a personal preference and you could play whoever you'd like. That's all I've written for now. I hope you enjoyed the video, and I hope you learned something. If you have any requests or suggestions for videos, come spam my chat on Twitch or leave a comment. I really enjoyed going through some of my clips and breaking them down, so if that's something you want to see more of, let me know. That's all for now, aim assist gamers.